This session will provide an in-depth look at the current state of the business aviation MRO industry, exploring both the challenges and opportunities shaping its future. Once again, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Molly McMillin, who is the managing editor, Business Aviation for Aviation Week Network. It's a pleasure once again, Molly, to have you here. Thank you.
All right, I'll have our panel come up and I'll introduce them as they're coming up. First is Paul Desgrosseilliers with ExecuJet Haite. He oversees MRO, FBO, charter, and aircraft management in China. The next is Phil Balmer, TAG Aviation Asia's Director of Maintenance. He brings 30 years of experience and holds certifications from Australia, EASA, and FAA. Next is Simon Wayne. He leads Bombardier's service center in Singapore. Now the region's largest. He's pioneered China's first business aviation MRO FBO. And last but certainly not least is Trevor Merszei. He leads JSSI's APAC operation, previously CEO of Orient Skies. So thank you so much, all of you. One second, I'll get my notes here. In the session yesterday, there were the Aviation Week Network's forecast MRO growth over the next 10 years growing faster than the global averages and for Asia. And I wanted to have each one of you maybe just take a minute and talk about what are you seeing in the market and what are you projecting, just if each one of you could just talk a little bit about your market in your part of the world, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all coming from different regions. We have different responsibilities. Myself covering all of Asia, I notice a lot of nuance between different parts of Asia. So, for example, China right now is fairly flat, I would suggest. Southeast Asia is still quite buoyant post-COVID. And some of the other countries that had some policies during COVID that locked down a bit longer, starting to come back a little bit later than others. So it really is quite mixed within the single region. It's quite nuanced.
Okay, Simon, do you want to? Oh, sorry.
Sure, Molly. Yeah, we've seen a great increase in charter activity. We've been supporting some very large charter operators in and out of the region. That's, I think, 50% above what it used to be pre-COVID. More people are using the charter option in region. Particularly Southeast Asia has seen a huge amount of activity in and out of Singapore, where I'm based. And yeah, it's looking good across the region, especially India now is bringing a lot of activity to the region, and a lot of traffic in and out of the region is also Middle East as well, we've seen.
Great. Trevor?
Yeah, similar to what Phil was saying, we're seeing China's a bit flat. We've seen a lot of aircraft obviously leave China in the last couple of years. We're seeing a lot of activity in India. We're seeing a lot of activity in Japan. We're seeing a lot of activity in Southeast Asia, primarily Indonesia, Singapore. A lot of these emerging markets are very interesting because they're coming from a low basis. So you're talking about Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, to a certain extent the Philippines. So we're seeing very similar things to what everybody else has mentioned already.
And I think from my perspective, to address the China market, and North Asia in particular, yes, I think that we all know we have a number of challenges in China. The market is relatively flat. The fleet is declining. We see stabilization in Hong Kong, which is good, a little bit of growth, right? We see the increase of one aircraft in Hong Kong. We hope it's a bellwether of what's to come for mainland China. MRO activity, on the other hand, we've seen an increase of the MRO activity. Our facility grew. We had our best year ever last year in 2024. I think there's a number of reasons for that. The aging of the aircraft themselves, As the aircraft get older, obviously it drives the scope of the maintenance itself. So we see increasing demand from our side, but that's driven just by the age of the aircraft. But the fleet itself continues to decline. We just hope it's going to stabilize. And that's, I think, different from Southeast Asia, where the fleet is growing, right? We all see the fleet migrating a bit out of China and increasing in Southeast Asia, driving more demand in this part of the world.
Could I echo something there that our TAG 145 in Hong Kong, we had our best ever year last year as well. And some of that was consolidation of operators and MROs and people changing the fleet size. But we've had a very consistent approach. We kept all our staff. We made sure we kept our team. That was right from the top, and that really paid off because we were able to deliver when other people had let people go. We held on to staff and were able to deliver a good product. So it's still strong in Hong Kong, even though there have been some light periods of operations.
So talk about the customer in Asia. What influences their decision to bring their aircraft to stay within Asia? And I guess on the flip side, in the U.S., I know the MRO capacity is pretty full. And are they bringing their airplanes here, or I guess what's the status? What drives their decisions?
I can answer that. We're seeing more and more customers keeping their aircraft in the region for the larger events. Since our investment with the expansion back in 22, we quadrupled the size of the facility. Now we can offer a one-stop solution in terms of full heavy maintenance, modifications, paint, interior refurbishment. So we've seen most of these aircraft that we traditionally saw head to the US or Europe, now all getting this work done. I think now 90% of it here in region. And now we've hit over 300 strong staff. We're doing many hundreds of thousands of hours through the facility. And I think it's great to see that money being spent here, because we can then further increase the training, investment in tooling, equipment, and further workshops and facilities that help all the operators in the region have a better service year after year.
Trevor?
Well, I think historically one of the main things that influences Asian customers' decisions when choosing an MRO for heavy maintenance, is that feedback? Or? Okay. Sorry about that. If you're talking about heavy check, it's a worry when you're getting into structural stuff. And does the MRO have the capability to complete the structural work? Is there the infrastructure around the MRO? And that has driven a lot of people to the US and Europe. But now that the capabilities, the capacity, and everything has really risen in the region, it's really good for the customers. So we are seeing customers from Europe, from the Middle East, from elsewhere come to these MROs for their maintenance. And I think that as we move forward and as the slots are more jammed up in the US and elsewhere, that it's a really good opportunity for the regional MROs to show their value, and that'll just snowball from there.
Paul?
Yeah, I think to that point, certainly what we're seeing in China is that the Chinese customers themselves, if we look going back 10, 15 years ago, there was no doubt they were sending the aircraft either to North America and Singapore for those inspections. And more often than not, the Chinese domestic operators are now more than willing to send them to Chinese shops. And that's because the capabilities are now available. And when we talk about structure, we have extensive structural capabilities that we've developed over time in Tianjin that we didn't have available 10 years ago. And there are a multitude of services that extend beyond the MRO available in country now. The Chinese customer is a lot more willing to trust the Chinese MRO. And then it's the experience level. This is critical to delivering a good MRO service, is the experience level of the engineers themselves. And that has to develop over time. Business aviation was new to China 15 years ago. Many of my engineers only had commercial maintenance experience, and that's just different from business jet maintenance experience. Now my engineers all have 10 or 15 years working on business jets, so they can deliver that level of service that wasn't available 10 years ago. So we routinely perform those very heavy base maintenance inspections that more often than not include structural repair. We do that in Tianjin, and the customers are willing to come back year after year because they trust us to perform that high level of work.
Yeah, for me, there's three key pillars. There's actually a multitude of considerations, and every single project is different, but a lot of it comes down to capability, value, and trust. Obviously, safety is in there, and that's part of trust. But, for example, when you're talking about capabilities, if you need paint, you need a facility that has that capability, and you trust them to do a good job. There's warranty cover, so a lot of the work is being done at a service center, and where is the nearest service center that can do that work under warranty? Capabilities, because people will quote maintenance all the time, but the question is, what might you find that could escalate that work scope, and are they ready to deal with those escalations? So there's so many values. The other thing is, of course, the ferry costs. If you want to take an aircraft to the US, you might be up for $120,000 to get the aircraft there. So does that ultimately feed the value? Maybe there's a capability they have or a turnaround time that is better than Asia, or maybe not. There's a lot of variables in there, and every single project is different.
May as well ask about the supply chain of availability and parts, and what are you seeing? Are things stressed? Are they getting better? What's the status? Whoever wants to start first, Phil.
I'll just carry on. I did suggest before the panel we shouldn't use trigger words like supply chain, but we're going to go there. But I think essentially for us, I mean, look, the OEMs and the suppliers such as JSSI and the OEMs are really pushing for that. It's a lot better than it was, but I say the troubled few. There's still some part numbers out there that are really difficult to source, and some of these solutions, I think there are examples where the provider of the products to make a windshield is now in a sanctioned country, so they have to go to another provider, so problem solved, and now that provider, maybe the quality's not as good as it was, and we have more difficulty delivering a particular part, and you're still feeling some of that pain several years down the road, because it takes time. This supply chain is quite delicate, and it doesn't take much to disrupt. But I think from my experience, there's a lot of pressure. The OEMs have put troubleshooters inside the supply from the vendors, and I think they're doing as best they can do. But there's just a few that are still trouble.
Yeah, that's right. We have about 40, 50 supplier performance agents in suppliers, or weekly meeting them around the world to ensure we can help them get those parts into the facilities, into the distribution centres, and out to the customers as quickly as possible. As COVID happened, Bombardier invested heavily in seeing that the market was going to recover early. I think that helped a lot, and so, I mean, last year at the AIN Product Support Survey, Bombardier was voted #1 in the industry, and half the respondents it was all based on parts supply. So today in the region we're doing 92.6% off the shelf last week, and the same this week. So it's crucial. Can't do maintenance without parts, and any AOG situations, we're certainly prioritising our customers to get those parts to it as quickly as possible, and having forward inventories, such we have about over $30 million in our facility here in Singapore, and not only that we can use, but distribute to Phil and anyone else in the region that needs them to support the aircraft. So it's come a long way. It's improved dramatically compared to 4 years ago, but there's still work to be done.
Trevor?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things driving scarcity in the supply chain. I think that you've got scarcity of raw materials. You've got geopolitical instability. You've got overly reliance on single source suppliers in some cases. I'm sorry, Phil, I'm going to throw out a trigger word. Windshield. All right, we're still experiencing some pain on windshields, but look, it's a lot better than it has been. This time last year, Phil would have been sweating right now when I said windshield. And it's gotten better, but going back to the raw materials, going back to some of the advanced metallurgical materials. When we're talking about like high pressure turbine blades, low pressure turbine blades, a lot of the engine components, we're still seeing a lot of pain points. And what we're doing is across our broader fleet, across, we anticipate these events and we're going out and sourcing and supplying the parts we need, sometimes depending on the OEM, depending on the model and the make, 2 years in advance on the engines. Even though it's gotten a lot better, there is a need to be proactive about the parts supply, about, on behalf of our customers. I mean, we're, collated across our different business units. We're flying 2 million plus hours annually. We're doing 10,000 plus maintenance events. So for us, it's very, very important in a lot of circumstances to reach out into our broader vendor network to solve problems, to solve pain points, to be really flexible on behalf of our customers, which at the end of the day is really good for the industry and the region as a whole.
Paul?
Yeah, and I guess to that point, it is about getting ahead of it, right? It's about identifying the inspection as far out in advance as possible, looking at what potential bottlenecks, that could come during that inspection, particular NRCs discussing with the customer well in advance of the maintenance input, what's wrong with the aircraft, so we can discuss with our OEM partners, we can discuss with their vendors, so we can source that in advance. I got to say, most of the OEMs know where the pain points are, right? So if we can work with them well in advance of a maintenance input, order that. If it's on back order, make sure we can have it 3 to 6 months in advance. I think this is critical. It's about sharing information with the customer. It really is, and then we can discuss with the OEM and we can find solutions. So it's all about, getting this information in advance.
I was going to ask you, how do you talk to your customers to make sure they're understand what the issues are, or for how long it's going to take? And
we'll get out at least 12 months ahead to start discuss the upcoming event, understand their needs, and then send out some people to go survey, understand what that is, and start to define that up front, any work scope additions, and then that'll give us a good indication what we need to sort out very quickly. And then as we build closer to it, fine-tune that and make sure everything's in place in the pre-planning meetings. And then when it comes in and we're ready for the usual eventualities already, then that's great for us, because we know we can get it turned around and out the same time that was planned, and that helps capacity for bringing the next aircraft into the spot that was vacated.
I think from our perspective, in talking to the customers, it's all about the quality of communication. It's all about the questions you ask. And then also about understanding, from our perspective and all of our data and all of the stuff we can prognosticate on the unscheduled level and really anticipate. But at the end of the day, the customer has to understand that you have to commit to the work early. You have to get out in front of these things, going back to Paul's point, which is the most important thing, both regionally and globally.
Are there capacity constraints in this area? I know U.S. talks about capacity constraints and wait times. I think they're getting better, I understand, but I'm wondering, what's the situation here? I think, is it different or similar, or any of you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think each MRO has their own issues. I think the US right now, the slots are crazy. You've got to book so far in advance if you want to go into a major service center in the US. Some of the capacity here, depending on the size of the job, you really do need to book in advance. But I mean, everything's about that pre-planning. But right now in the States, it is completely crazy, and you need to be a long way ahead.
Great. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of bookings well in advance, which is great, because there's a chance to do that pre-planning and manpower across the different trades. The business aircraft market in the US is the largest in the world, so you have a huge fleet there. While here we've been investing in infrastructure to support the growth of the fleet here. So it's not as bad, and we're actually seeing, we saw our first aircraft from the US fly out of the West Coast, come get a paint job done here in Singapore last year. So now it's as far afield that we can support customers like that here.
I think one point that needs to be mentioned is, beyond the large OEM MROs and stuff like that, we've got a lot of smaller regional MROs in the region, and that's created additional capacity. That's created additional competition and additional choice, which is very important for the region, very important for the customers. I mean, just on an AOG level, where these aircraft are flying when they go down, it's important to have the facilities and the capability and the parts to service these aircraft. So I think that choice is also a really important component, especially once the aircraft are out of warranty. And competition is good for the industry as a whole. It's always good. And the only one that really benefits from the competition at the end of the day is the customer.
Paul, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess I'm one of those MROs. I would be the regional MRO, third-party MRO. I have strong affiliations with the OEMs. I'm authorized by many of the OEMs, so I work with the OEMs, but I am a third-party MRO. Speaking specifically to the China market itself, we do have capacity in country. We do have ample room to grow. I have a new facility now in Beijing. Our Tangent facility's been at capacity more or less for quite some time. We have a new facility now in Beijing, a much larger facility, and there is ample capacity now. We just really opened the business and have the approval now for only about a month. So we have room to grow. I think many of the Chinese domestic MROs have room for growth, right? There is capacity there. I think there's more restraints in other parts of the world. Certainly North America, even Simon's business does very well. They may not be at capacity, but they're near capacity. The facilities, are quite busy. But I think in Northern Asia and China specifically, we have capacity.
We've got some Slido questions, and one is, how are MRO providers adapting to the increasing complexity of modern business jets? How is that changing your business? Who wants to jump in? Simon?
Talking from the OEM point of view, we've added a lot of aircraft health monitoring systems onto the latest platforms. And so now a director of maintenance can sit on his couch while the aircraft's in flight, monitor all the parameters, see anything that might be needing some attention in advance. The diagnostics, our customer response centers that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, can look at that in advance and then position the right person with the right part at the next destination. So certainly that technology's become a lot more predictive and anticipating the needs when it lands.
I think with complexity also comes obsolescence, right? And oftentimes for us, that's a challenge when you have parts that are no longer supported, when there's no option. And that's where you really have to define yourself, get creative, reach out to, cast a wider net, or maybe combine several different components into one component.
We can help you upgrade.
Yes, I know, and you have, and we appreciate it.
Anyone else want to grab that one?
I mean, for me, it's as an operator and an MRO, I mean, I love the AHTMS and having the data from the aircraft and knowing on descent that I have a problem we have to deal with and getting ahead of that. But having that real-time feedback is just enhances our ability to support the aircraft. And then from the MRO side, I think for us, it's training and having a consistent team with low turnover so we can help have that culture and the knowledge. Where people are turning over, it's such a nuanced business. You just need a solid experience on type. And I know Paul's benefited from that a lot, as we have. And it's so important in MRO to keep that team so that knowledge doesn't escape. And in a growing market, when I came to Asia a long time ago, there were 2 business jet MROs in Singapore, and we covered Beijing to New Zealand. I mean, every now and then for EASA and things like that. So now we have a lot more facilities around the place to cover.
A couple of you brought up that aircraft now have sensors that collected all sorts of data, and you kind of know what's going on before you even land. As MROs, how do you use that data to perform predictive maintenance, and how are the OEMs sharing that data with you all?
As the OEM, we have twice yearly advisory forums with the leading operators around the world, and directors of maintenance get briefed on that, the top 25 parts and what we're doing to improve that. So that's being shared across the industry multiple times a year in that forum, as well as our monthly updates. So then that information's then continue to be shared through our maintenance operations seminars we conduct around the world. One recently in Hong Kong, not that long ago. So yeah, it's a continuous process of communication that Trevor talked about.
Yeah, I think the data is very important, and the complexities and the sensors and everything, but it's also the quality of data and the quantity of data you can accumulate, and where you're accumulating that data from, and then how you're using that data. And at JSSI, we're very data-driven with our maintenance tracking software. We're very data-driven in terms of our historical failure rates, in terms of being able to, take a look at really, based on the utilization, what's going to go unscheduled on a broader fleet. And so, that's just one component, but there's a lot more data that you can use. You can actually share with the market. You can share with your associates for everybody's benefit. And that's what we're looking towards doing more.
So I think from my perspective, and as a third-party MRO, what I would like to see a wider adoption of is the customer willingness to share that data. And so we can get out ahead of it, because I think we're still in the early stages. These airplanes are now, especially the latest generation, producing tremendous amounts of data, right? And sometimes the customer may be not willing to either adopt some of these new systems that can monitor it, because maybe there is additional cost associated with that. So there's some reluctance there. But then the willingness to share that data, to get out ahead of it, to discuss, whether it's with the OEMs or directly with the MRO. I think from my perspective, we're not quite there yet in my market. But I think we're all still really, we're on the, it's all coming in with this newest generation of aircraft now being delivered in mass. I think we're just now starting to see what's capable. So now we just got to get buy-in from the customers and the willingness to share that.
Yeah, what I'm excited about is where it's going to go. I think the use of AI and on that flight data, where we need to be is where they can look at the data from an aeroplane and say, this bleed air valve is going to fail and you should replace that proactively. And I know that there's OEMs that are working on that information, and this is exactly where we want to be, where we can get ahead of it and avoid an AOG, and that is actually happening right now. So I'm excited to see some of that come through.
Are customers signing up for the health monitoring programs? Are they? What are you seeing?
You can answer.
You have the data.
More and more, absolutely. The last few decades, the engine OEMs have been very strong in this, of course, and we see almost all customers that are going with the programs on the engines, which is super important. And I see Mark here from Rolls-Royce, one of those programs. When they start seeing the value that they're getting out of that and the reliability and the ability to anticipate, I think that's going to take some time, but it's definitely heading in the right direction.
Good. We've got a couple more Slido questions. One is, how can operators ensure the quality and reliability of MRO services in different parts of Asia?
I'll take that one. What we do for our customers that are on our airframe engine APU programs is we assign them a dedicated technical representative that's very experienced on the specifics, on who what the capabilities are, what the quality of work is, what the timing of it might be. And, so our technical representatives, we have 100 plus all over the world, they'll actually interface with the customer, interface with the MRO, and guide them through that whole process to ensure that they have a beneficial experience. That's how we do it.
Anyone else?
I guess as an operator, I think if anybody puts their aircraft through any 145 on autopilot without people, that second set of eyes, double checking, are we on track, asking the questions, I think they're going to end up in a very bad situation. So having, experienced, knowledgeable people to shadow, to oversee, to ask the questions and just make sure the MRO's not going off on a tangent, I think is highly important. And you work as a team. Try not to be, you don't antagonize the MRO, but just work with them to make sure they deliver the product. And but that's where you need the engineering, the good camo experienced camos to make sure that they're in there driving it. You're certainly not just a coordinator. You need to drive the process with the MRO.
One other question is, how do MRO challenges differ across the various regions in Asia? Are there different challenges in different places? And if so, what are they?
I mean, we're very lucky in Singapore to have an amazing air hub that brings parts in within hours once it lands. Other places in Asia still, it takes many days to clear, which is going to affect the aircraft return to service. So certainly that's one that hopefully we'll keep improving across the region.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges in Asia versus, say, in the U.S. or in Europe, from a logistics standpoint, you're talking about many different countries with different import-export regulations, et cetera, et cetera. Also, one of our challenges is supplying parts to China. And what we're doing now is we're going out and we're CAC tagging everything, which I'm sure Paul's going to like. But it's nuanced because of the geography, because of the regulations, and because of the fact that we're dealing with so many different countries here.
Yeah, and to that point, this is a constant issue for me. We have to have CAC tags on all used parts that go on Chinese aircraft, right? And it's difficult to explain this to parts companies. It's great, I think I talked to somebody yesterday and saying JSSI is well aware of some of the issues I have. So we regularly source parts from JSSI because he knows what we need, because it's very specific to China that you have to have a 037 tag on a certain part, right? So I think there are regional differences, and a lot of it in China is we've dealt with over the years, the last 10, 15 years, I've been dealing with issues for aircraft parts. How do we get them in the country, and what are the tax implications for doing that? And the Chinese government has routinely, especially Tianjin, and now when I'm talking to Beijing and we're rolling out some of the same policies, they continue to roll out beneficial policies for the customer, the end user. Foreign aircraft now no longer pay VAT on a lot of the aircraft parts that we push through, where those VAT tax, back 10 years ago were extremely high, very, very high, to the point where I don't think you could run an MRO under those circumstances. That's all changed now, and it changes. It's region specific, even within China. It's province specific. My policies in Tianjin are very different from my policies in Beijing. And it's more developed in Tianjin because we've been doing business there along with my sister company on the commercial MRO side for the last 10 or 15 years. And Beijing is a new business, but we're working with them, we're educating them, and they're rolling out the same policies that we have in Tianjin now in Beijing. They also rolled out last year in China where we can apply now ahead of time, both as an MRO and the operators. We all work together. We listed tens of thousands of aircraft parts on a list within the Chinese government, within the customs system, and now those are no longer subject to taxes when we import those. And that paperwork process started off at maybe 10 days to get that aircraft duty-free into country. Now we get it down to about 3 days, and it's improving, constantly. So there are many, many issues that we face, say, in China that are going to be very different from what Simon faces and very different from Hong Kong. And Trevor kind of sees the entire region and has to learn what we all deal with so he can satisfy our needs.
There's another Slido question. What are your thoughts on India as an MRO market? What do you think? Simon?
Yeah, we've seen a tremendous amount of activity since 2022, after COVID coming to Singapore, because we have the one-stop set of capabilities. In the past, again, it was go to the US or go to Europe, but now there's an option here in this part of the world. So only 4 hours away, many of our staff speak the same languages, understand the cultures. So we built a long-term relationship, not only our people in the country, but with the facility here, only a few hours away. And it's been amazing to see some of the projects we've been able to do for India. And it's a tremendous growth there, one of the strongest, I think, in the entire region. So, and only going from strength to strength.
I agree. The aviation growth in India right now is huge. It's kind of the buzzword for the region. But until they really set up the infrastructure. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it takes a while to get these capabilities, to get this talent, to get this infrastructure. And for the short term, you know, long term, I'm sure there's a lot of sights being set on India as an MRO market in and of itself. But, you know, right now it presents a tremendous opportunity to all the MROs in APAC to support all these aircraft.
I have a question on workforce. What are you seeing as in the U.S. there's a real shortage of A&P mechanics and technical help. What are you seeing here, and how are you kind of growing the next generation of the folks that you need?
Okay. So, I mean, we aren't lucky enough as the US where you can put an advert, I need a 7500 B1 engineer, and they all come knocking on your door off the street. So from the beginning in this part of the world, we've had to go grow them all, either converting people from commercial aviation into business aviation, or like we do today, we have now 35 apprentices running through a trainee licensed engineer scheme over a 5-year program. Some of them right now are sitting in a type training to become their first aircraft type train license holder. So we've invested over 100,000 hours in the last decade in training, over $1 million US in training, and we just have to continue doing that year after year. Work with all the polytechnics, the colleges, the universities, internships, study tours, and with ASBA, we've been working closely with the ASBA team on discovery, so bringing more interest to business aviation particularly. So yeah, I think it's across all fronts, but we can't do enough if we want to grow the industry.
Yeah, I agree. Not just in the U.S. Regionally, we've seen a lot of flight of experienced talent out of various facilities, going between facilities, or actually going into space flight or whatever. And unfortunately, that creates an unpleasant experience sometimes for the customer when you don't have the talented project managers, when you don't have the experience. And what we do at JSSI is we do internship programs in the U.S. Over the last 10 years, let's say 150 people went through the internship program. More than 25 of them have full-time employment with JSSI now in various different capacities. We do a lot of outreach to universities in the U.S., creating curriculums. Then on another level, I mean, we've got, in APAC, I've got over 100 headcount. A lot of them young, a lot of them licensed aeronautical engineers that work with us in various capacities that we're building up. We're educating both, in many facets of this business. Even some people that are not from the industry, we're educating in various sort of corporate roles and stuff like that. But I think that as an industry, we have to do that a lot more to really protect the quality, to protect the experience, and we, as an industry, really owe that to our customers to do that.
Yeah, at TAG, since we've had our 145, we've essentially always had trainees, and so our first trainee is now leading our avionics team, still there after 14 years and doing a hell of a job. And so we basically usually we take people who have been trained in the airline industry, have the basics, and then bring sometimes a basic license. We bring them in, and then we train them, we put them next to very experienced engineers, and over time we teach them the culture and the approach. And that, of course, in this part of the world, when you have growth, it's the grow and divide, right? And that's sort of what I was alluding to before, that as it grows, people will try to take people from the other companies. It's natural. So looking after your people, keeping your people that you've trained is very, very important to build that knowledge. And just got to build a strong team as best you can.
And Paul, are you getting the ones that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think, to that point, as Phil said, the most important, I think, success factor at any MRO is the people, right? It's the people that we have and the people that we retain. This has always been the number one goal in our company, was to build a company, have the strong foundation, hire good engineers from the beginning, which we did, many years ago, and then just build upon that. And we have nearly in our company, we have nearly no turnover. None of our engineers have left over the years. We keep everybody. And then we start the programs that they talked about today. You know, I think in 2019 was the first year where we hired 6 interns. They're all still with us today, all but one. One went to his hometown. Got married and went home, but the 5 are still with us today. And, you know, the growth that I've seen from even them 5 or 6 years within us, you know, they're as skilled as any other engineer in another operation in China now. And they're only 24, 25 years old, and now they're going to start doing some type trainings this year. And then, you know, 2 years after that, another 3 came in. 2 years after that, another 3 came in. And, you know, like I said, now we have about a dozen really young guys that are very highly skilled. And it's all done in-house, and we develop that, and then we retain them. And I always talk to my staff, make sure these guys are happy. But, you know, it's all about building a culture where everybody is happy. We have a outstanding company culture. We work hard at that. We're committed both from group level down to within my company. We have a reward system, robust reward system in place, but we just focus on keeping the employee in-house, building on that knowledge base, because that's what's ultimately going to determine the success of the MRO.
And just one more thing to add. One part of our focus has been, you know, we have 50% of the population, the women, that we are sadly unrepresented in business aviation. So we've fortunately been able to develop some amazing talent there. They're now giving back in the women aviation with as being mentors to fellow up-and-coming women in the industry. The sponsorship programs and the dinners and building that awareness. So if we can get that out to as many women out there in the early stages of education to come join the industry, we've got 50% of the population there that we really hasn't been tapped. So we need more of it.
One quick question with regard to hourly cost maintenance programs, or go back to that in APAC. What are some differences between other markets, and how does this shape your relationships with MROs and operators in the region?
Okay, so we've got a relatively small market in APAC the way we cut it up, because at JSSI we kind of lump India into our Middle East division. So you're talking about a relatively small fleet. In terms of the difference between the APAC market with hourly cost maintenance and other markets, despite that relatively small fleet, we sign up a lot of airframes. And there's a variety of reasons for that. On a transactional basis, a lot of the aircraft coming into region are already on engine programs. So the airframe is the opportunity. Also, I'd like to think that our operator partners that work with us, they really, really like our white glove service and approach. But being so airframe heavy, it's a lot different covering airframes than it's covering engines, right? Basically, every time the aircraft flies, there's something. And that creates a high workload. So, retaining our talent, hiring more talent, getting the right talent, making sure that we're getting out in front of this. So that's one of the idiosyncrasies. Then another idiosyncrasy is China. The Chinese market is vastly different than, even on the engine side. China, you've got a large fleet of self-reserved aircraft. And, for whatever reason, there was some thinking in the past that, why do I need an engine program when the aircraft is under warranty? Or maybe I can take that money over time, invest it, and we don't have that lost opportunity costs anymore. And also in China, a lot of these aircraft have been sold. And a lot of these people, whether it's JSSI, whether it's OEM programs, it's very similar in the sense that when you sell an aircraft without an engine program, the value, the resale value, is going to be significantly lower, to the point that actually the program over time will be worth more than, you'll put in less money than you'll lose. So it's actually a pretty good return on investment. And we don't like to see a lot of uncovered aircraft in a highly corrosive environment that are sitting for a long time that might create problems for the owners. And so that's another nuance. It's moving in the right direction, but it's not quite at the level that, say, the rest of APAC is in terms of the awareness and the importance of these programs.
Yeah, I think we've got to keep educating the new owners that previously haven't had aircraft to the program and the value of it. Later on, those large checks when they bring aircraft in for those inspections, and there's a lot of nasty surprises that were really sown in the previous 5-10 years. It doesn't help those owners want to stay in business aviation if it becomes such a horrific financial experience. So the more we can educate that and get those aircraft on any of these programs, it's great for the growth of this industry. A lot less surprises.
All right. I think there was one quick last one, and then we'll wrap up. How does the CAMO, Continuing Airworthiness Management Organization, affect maintenance outcomes and aircraft availability?
I'll take that as an operator with CAMO and MRO. A good CAMO will drive the situation. And I see it out there. I see people saying, oh, we do CAMO, and maybe they're just a coordinator, but you know, if there's an ongoing problem with the aircraft or a repeat defect, do you just believe what the MRO says? Do you know, if you go to 7 different MROs, they're telling you something different. Who's consolidating that information? Who's making sure the next step is the right step? Who's got that second set of eyes? And to me, that's why an experienced CAMO is absolutely critical. You can save a ton of money if you've got experienced people taking the next steps and just driving it to completion. That's the important part, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think to this point, we see it from my side for an MRO. Some of the strongest relationships that we have, customer to MRO relationship, are with companies that have professional experience CAMO. The CAMO, exactly what Phil said, they got to get out ahead of it. They got to manage the process, and it has to be a team effort. Right? They don't have to be at the throat of the MRO and telling the MRO to cut costs. The best relationships we have are the ones the closest we work with CAMO, because they know the airplane, they work with it day in, day out. They talk to the crew, they talk to any engineers from within their organization, and they can prep the MRO and follow the process along with us. And if it's a true team effort, we can deliver just outstanding services in support of that aircraft. It's got to be a team, and we do find the best CAMO, we can deliver the best service.
Absolutely agree. And to support all this CAMO and communication, we entered the maintenance tracking software space and acquired Traxall and Sierra Trax, which is now Aviator. And you know, we look forward to giving the CAMO departments the right tools and the most easiest to use tools, the most up-to-date software that we can to help facilitate that.
And experience isn't cheap. So if you want good CAMO, you know, maybe you have to pay a few more dollars, but it absolutely pays off in tenfold, no doubt about it.
Great. Well, we are out of time, so we'll wrap it up. I want to thank all of you for attending this session, and we really appreciate it, and especially thank our panelists for their insights and great comments. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Molly.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you to our panelists as well, and thank you, audience, today for your presence.